The morning sun filtered through the towering windows of Courtroom 302, casting long shadows across the meticulously polished floor. The historic Franklin County Courthouse had witnessed countless legal battles over its century-long existence, but this Tuesday morning would prove particularly memorable. The mahogany-lined walls seemed to hold their breath as attorney Michelle Robinson's heels clicked purposefully across the marble floor. At precisely 9:15 a.m., Michelle adjusted her perfectly tailored charcoal suit and placed her navy leather briefcase on the counsel's table. The briefcase, a graduation gift from her father 20 years ago, had accompanied her through numerous groundbreaking victories, including 3 appearances before federal appellate courts. Its well-worn handles told stories of late nights, challenging cases, and unwavering determination. Judge Richard Harrison sat elevated at his bench, his silver hair and stern expression crafted to command respect. His eyes remained fixed on the morning's docket, barely acknowledging the attorneys filing into his courtroom. A slight frown creased his brow as he noted the Preston development case on his schedule, a complex constitutional matter he'd hoped would be handled by one of the city's more established firms. The gallery filled quietly with an unusual mix of observers. Several senior partners from neighboring firms had slipped in, along with a group of first-year law students from Capital University Law School. They'd heard whispers about Attorney Robinson's brilliant legal strategies and had come to witness her expertise firsthand. Among them sat James Chen, the legal correspondent for the State Bar Journal, his notebook already open. As Michelle organized her materials, her assistant, Sarah Williams, efficiently arranged supporting documents and water glasses. Sarah caught the subtle glances exchanged between other legal professionals in the room, some impressed, others curious, and a few wearing knowing smiles. They had all received the news alert last week, though clearly some in the courthouse hadn't. In the matter of Preston Development versus the State Environmental Commission, Judge Harrison's voice carried across the courtroom, his tone carrying a hint of dismissiveness as he glanced at Michelle. "I see we have." Ms. Robinson representing the plaintiff. Michelle rose smoothly, her posture impeccable. "Yes, Your Honor." Michelle Robinson for Preston Development. Her voice carried the perfect blend of confidence and respect, honed through 2 decades of courtroom experience. "Very well," Judge Harrison replied, peering over his reading glasses. "Though I must say, I expected Stanley Peters to handle this personally, given the constitutional implications." A small smile played at the corners of Michelle's mouth as she began her opening statement. "Your Honor, the constitutional implications are precisely why I chose to handle this matter personally." She opened her briefcase, revealing a meticulously organized collection of documents. 20 years of landmark decisions, including 3 she had personally argued before the highest courts. The morning light continued its journey across the courtroom floor as Michelle began her presentation, her voice clear and commanding. The young law students in the gallery leaned forward, notebooks ready, unaware they were about to witness not just a brilliant legal argument, but a moment that would be discussed in law schools for years to come. In the back of the courtroom, Sarah discreetly checked her phone, confirming that yesterday's official Supreme Court press release had been widely circulated. She glanced at Judge Harrison, wondering exactly how long it would take for him to realize exactly who stood before his bench this morning. Michelle's fingers traced the edge of her legal brief as she began her presentation on the constitutional implications of the Preston Development case. The morning light had shifted, casting a warm glow across the courtroom as she articulated each point with precision and clarity that came from years of experience. "Your Honor, the precedent established in Morrison v. Davidson clearly outlines the parameters for environmental impact considerations," she began, her voice carrying the weight of authority. Just as she delved into the heart of her argument, Judge Harrison raised his hand, interrupting her flow. "Ms. Robinson," he interjected, leaning forward with an air of patronizing concern, "are you familiar with the recent amendments to the State Environmental Protection Act?" His tone suggested he already assumed she wasn't. A ripple of quiet murmurs spread through the gallery. In the third row, Professor Janet Chen from Capital Law School, who had brought her constitutional law students to observe, pressed her lips together in a tight line. She recognized the familiar scene playing out, one she had witnessed countless times in her 30 years of legal practice. Michelle's response was masterful. "Indeed, Your Honor," she replied, smoothly pulling out a document from her carefully organized files. "In fact, I was part of the legal committee that drafted those amendments last spring. If you'll direct your attention to Section 4.3. The young law students frantically scribbled notes, not just about the legal precedents being discussed, but about Michelle's composure. Her ability to maintain professionalism while subtly establishing her expertise was a lesson in courthouse diplomacy. Judge Harrison shifted in his seat, clearly caught off guard, but pressed on. "Well, yes, but when we consider the Hamilton case from 2019, excellent reference, Your Honor," Michelle seamlessly interjected, her smile never wavering. "The Hamilton case actually supports our position." She pulled out another brief, her movements deliberate and confident. "I had the privilege of arguing that case before the Fourth Circuit. The court's decision, which I can quote directly, states." Sarah, watching from her position at the counsel's table, noticed the subtle changes in the courtroom atmosphere. The senior partners who had come to observe were exchanging knowing glances. Court reporter Marina Jenkins had paused her typing, her fingers hovering over the keys as she watched the exchange with rapt attention. As Michelle continued her presentation, she wove together constitutional principles with practical applications, creating a tapestry of legal reasoning that was both sophisticated and accessible. Each time Judge Harrison attempted to undermine her arguments, she responded with additional layers of precedent and analysis. "Perhaps," Judge Harrison suggested during a brief pause, his frustration becoming visible, "you might want to consult with someone more seasoned in constitutional law before we proceed further." He emphasized the word seasoned with a slight edge to his voice. The irony of his statement caused several attorneys in the gallery to shift uncomfortably in their seats. James Chen, the legal correspondent, was now writing furiously in his notebook, recognizing the historical significance of this moment. Michelle maintained her poise, her voice steady and clear. "Your Honor, I appreciate your concern for thorough legal representation." She paused, making direct eye contact with the judge. "However, given my experience arguing constitutional matters before various courts, including 3 cases before the Supreme Court, I feel quite confident in my analysis." Sarah glanced at her watch, then at the envelope sitting in her briefcase. The timing would have to be perfect. As Michelle continued her brilliant legal exposition, Sarah began to quietly remove the official document that would transform the entire dynamic of the courtroom. The morning session had stretched into its second hour, and the atmosphere in courtroom 302 grew increasingly charged with each passing moment. Michelle stood at the podium, her presence commanding attention as she skillfully navigated through complex constitutional arguments. The sunlight now streamed directly through the western windows, creating a natural spotlight on her position before the bench. "If we examine the historical context," Michelle continued, her voice carrying the measured tone of someone who had spent years crafting persuasive arguments, "the Supreme Court's decision in the Bennett case provides clear guidance." She paused, allowing the weight of her words to settle in the courtroom. Judge Harrison drummed his fingers on the bench, a habit he'd developed over years of showing impatience with arguments he deemed beneath his attention. "Ms. Robinson," he interrupted again, "I'm quite familiar with Bennett. I've been presiding over constitutional matters since before you entered law school." A slight smile graced Michelle's features as she thought about the irony of his statement. In the gallery, Professor Chen discreetly shook her head, while her students exchanged confused glances. They had just studied Michelle's groundbreaking analysis of the Bennett case in their constitutional law seminar last week. "Your Honor," Michelle responded with graceful precision, "then you'll recall the majority opinion's emphasis on procedural due process, particularly in paragraph 3, which reads." She quoted the passage verbatim, her memory sharp and accurate. Several senior attorneys in the gallery nodded appreciatively, They recognized the quotation from her recent publication in the Harvard Law Review. Judge Harrison's expression tightened. "Ms. Robinson, perhaps we should schedule a continuation. This might give you time to consult with more experienced counsel who regularly handle matters of this complexity." His tone carried a finality that suggested he was doing her a favor. At that moment, Sarah caught Michelle's eye and gave an almost imperceptible nod. The timing was perfect, precisely when the judge's condescension had reached its peak. Michelle maintained her composure, but those who watched closely might have noticed a subtle shift in her demeanor, like a chess master who knew checkmate was imminent. "Your Honor," Michelle replied, her voice carrying a new note of authority, "I appreciate your concern for adequate representation. However, I believe my experience is quite sufficient for this matter." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "In fact, just last month, I presented oral arguments on similar constitutional issues before." Judge Harrison raised his hand to interrupt yet again, but Sarah had already risen from her seat. With practiced efficiency, she approached the bench, carrying a crisp white envelope bearing the official seal of the United States Supreme Court. The courtroom fell into a hushed silence. Even the usual shuffle of papers and whispered conversations ceased. The young law students leaned forward in their seats, sensing they were about to witness something extraordinary. James Chen, the legal correspondent, had stopped writing, his pen hovering above his notebook. "Your Honor," Sarah spoke clearly, extending the envelope, "I believe this document is relevant to our current discussion." Her voice carried the perfect blend of respect and purpose. As Judge Harrison reached for the envelope, Michelle continued her legal argument without missing a beat, her voice steady and clear. The morning's previous interruptions had served only to highlight the depth of her knowledge and the strength of her presentation. Now, as the judge's fingers closed around the envelope that would change everything, Michelle's earlier patience and grace would prove to be more than just professional courtesy. They were the actions of someone who knew exactly who she was, and more importantly, who she was about to become. Time seemed to slow in courtroom 302 as Judge Harrison opened the crisp white envelope. The sound of breaking wax seal echoed in the hushed chamber. Michelle continued her legal exposition with unwavering focus, though every eye in the room darted between her and the judge's increasingly paling complexion. "As I was saying, Your Honor," Michelle's voice remained steady, "the constitutional implications of environmental protection measures must be considered within the broader context of public interest." She paused briefly, allowing Judge Harrison time to absorb the document's contents. The judge's hands trembled slightly as he read the official letter announcing Michelle Robinson's appointment to the United States Supreme Court. His reading glasses slipped down his nose, but he didn't adjust them. The date on the letter, last week's date, made everything crystal clear. In the gallery, Professor Chen pulled out her phone to capture this historic moment discreetly. Her students, still unaware of the exact contents of the letter, sensed the shifting dynamics from the judge's expression alone. The court reporter's fingers hovered over her stenotype machine, knowing these moments would be referenced in legal journals for years to come. Judge Harrison started, his voice unusually uncertain. He cleared his throat and tried again. "I see I have been insufficiently informed about counsel's credentials." The words seemed to stick in his throat. Michelle smoothly interjected, saving him from further discomfort. "Your Honor, shall I continue with my analysis of the Preston development case?" Her tone remained respectful, yet now carried an unmistakable weight of authority. She hadn't needed the revelation of her appointment to demonstrate her expertise. She had been doing that all morning. The judge's gaze darted around his courtroom, noting the knowing smiles on the faces of several senior attorneys. The legal correspondent, James Chen, was sketching something that looked suspiciously like a political cartoon. Even his own clerk was fighting to suppress a smile. "Yes, please proceed. Your Honorable. Ms. Robinson." Judge Harrison stumbled over the proper form of address, realizing that in a matter of days, she would hold a position that could review and overturn any of his decisions. Sarah settled back into her chair, mission accomplished. She noticed how the sunlight now seemed to form a natural halo around Michelle, who stood tall and composed at the podium. The soon-to-be Supreme Court Justice hadn't needed this moment of revelation to prove her worth. Her brilliant legal arguments had already done that. This was simply the period at the end of a very long sentence. "Thank you, Your Honor," Michelle responded graciously. Returning to the matter at hand, she seamlessly resumed her presentation, not dwelling on the judge's discomfort or the dramatic shift in the courtroom's atmosphere. Her focus remained entirely on serving her client and upholding the principles of law she had dedicated her life to defending. The remaining observers in the gallery sat transfixed. They weren't just watching a legal proceeding anymore. They were witnessing a masterclass in professional grace. Michelle's handling of the situation would be discussed in law schools alongside her future Supreme Court opinions, a lesson not just in constitutional law, but in dignity, perseverance, and the quiet power of letting your work speak for itself. By mid-afternoon, news of the morning's events in Courtroom 302 had spread through the Franklin County Courthouse like wildfire. The marble hallways buzzed with conversations held in hushed tones, and knowing glances were exchanged between legal professionals who had witnessed similar scenarios throughout their careers. In the courthouse cafeteria, Marina Jenkins, the court reporter from the morning session, found herself surrounded by curious colleagues. The amazing thing wasn't just her credentials, Marina explained, stirring her coffee thoughtfully. It was how she handled herself. Not once did she lose her composure or use her position to intimidate. That's real power. Up in his chambers, Judge Harrison sat at his desk, his usual confident demeanor notably subdued. The morning's events played on repeat in his mind as he reviewed his notes from other cases. His clerk, David Chen, approached with the afternoon docket, but paused at the door, noticing the judge's uncharacteristic stillness. "David," Judge Harrison called out suddenly, "could you pull all the cases we've had in the past year involving female attorneys and attorneys of color? I'd like to review them." His voice carried a note of genuine reflection that David had never heard before. Meanwhile, in the law library, Professor Chen's constitutional law students had commandeered a large table, their excitement barely contained despite the setting. "Did you see how she quoted the Bennett case from memory?" one student whispered enthusiastically. "And the way she handled each interruption with such grace." Sarah, Michelle's assistant, was sorting through an overwhelming number of media requests in their temporary office. The local bar association had already called twice, asking if Michelle would consider giving the keynote address at their upcoming conference. The theme, ironically, was breaking barriers in the legal profession. In a quiet corner of the courthouse garden, two senior partners from rival firms found themselves sharing a bench. "You know," the older one mused, "I've been doing this for 40 years, and I've seen too many talented lawyers face the same treatment she did this morning. Maybe it's time we looked at our own mentoring programs." The younger partner nodded, already pulling out her phone. "I'm thinking of starting a leadership initiative for our junior associates, something that focuses on building confidence and presence in the courtroom, regardless of background." Back inside, the courthouse staff gathered for their usual afternoon meeting, but today's discussion centered on one topic. Gloria Martinez, who had worked as a clerk for 25 years, spoke up. "In all my years here, I've never seen someone turn a difficult situation into such a powerful teaching moment. No anger, no resentment, just pure professionalism." Near the end of the day, James Chen, the legal correspondent, sat in his office finalizing his article. His editor had already cleared space on tomorrow's front page. The piece wasn't just about the morning's events, it was about transformation, about the quiet dignity of excellence proving itself in the face of doubt. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the courthouse windows, Judge Harrison's clerk noticed his boss still sitting at his desk, reading through old case files. On top of the stacks sat a draft of a letter, an apology not just to Michelle, but to every attorney who had stood in his courtroom and faced similar treatment. The day's events had sparked conversations that needed to happen, inspired changes that needed to be made, and reminded everyone in the legal community that excellence speaks for itself, if only given the chance to be heard. The following week found Michelle in her new office, surrounded by boxes yet to be unpacked. Through the tall windows, the capital city's skyline created a fitting backdrop for the work ahead. She sat at her desk, reviewing a proposal she'd been contemplating since the courthouse incident. "Sarah," she called to her assistant, who appeared instantly in the doorway. "Could you set up a meeting with the National Bar Association leadership? I think it's time we launched that mentoring initiative we discussed." Sarah smiled, already pulling up the calendar on her tablet. Dean Williams from Capital Law School called again. "He's very interested in your idea about the professional development program." Michelle nodded, turning to her computer to fine-tune the proposal. Her vision went beyond mere mentoring. She wanted to create a comprehensive program that would bridge gaps and build understanding across the legal community. The incident with Judge Harrison had shown her that change needed to come from within the system itself. Later that afternoon, Michelle stood before a packed lecture hall at Capital Law School. The audience included judges, attorneys, law students, and court staff, all drawn by the promise of an honest conversation about creating a more inclusive legal profession. "Excellence doesn't need validation," Michelle began, her voice carrying to the back row. "But it does need opportunity." She shared her experiences without bitterness, transforming them into teaching moments. "Our goal isn't to point fingers, but to build bridges of understanding." In the front row, several familiar faces from Courtroom 302 nodded in agreement. Professor Chen sat with her constitutional law students, who had already incorporated last week's events into their class discussions about professional ethics and courtroom conduct. "The strength of our legal system," Michelle continued, "lies in its ability to evolve and grow. Each of us, regardless of our position, has the power to contribute to that growth." She outlined her proposal for a mentoring network that would pair experienced professionals with emerging talents from all backgrounds. To everyone's surprise, Judge Harrison himself appeared at the back of the hall halfway through the presentation. Michelle acknowledged him with a professional nod before continuing her speech. His presence sent a powerful message about the possibility of change. After the presentation, small groups formed throughout the hall, engaging in earnest discussions about implementing the proposed initiatives. Senior partners from major firms compared notes on existing programs, while court administrators brainstormed ways to improve training for judicial staff. The most powerful change, Michelle told a group of eager law students who had gathered around her, often comes from turning challenging moments into opportunities for growth. She shared practical advice about maintaining composure and professionalism in difficult situations. As the evening wound down, Judge Harrison approached Michelle. "Your Honor," he began, his voice carrying genuine respect, "I wonder if you would consider allowing me to participate in your mentoring program. As a student, not a mentor, I believe I have much to learn." Michelle's response was warm and professional. "We all have something to learn from each other, Judge Harrison. That's exactly what this initiative is about." She handed him a copy of the program outline, marking a moment of transformation for both of them. On her drive home that evening, Michelle reflected on how a single morning in Courtroom 302 had catalyzed such meaningful change. Her appointment to the Supreme Court would allow her to shape legal precedent, but this initiative, this would shape the future of the legal profession itself. 1 month after the courthouse incident, the State Bar Association's main conference room was filled to capacity. The quarterly judicial education workshop had drawn an unprecedented attendance, with judges from across the state eager to participate in the new professional excellence program. Michelle stood at the podium, surveying the room with quiet satisfaction. The faces before her represented every level of the judicial system, from newly appointed judges to seasoned veterans. Even more encouraging was the diversity of the attendees, a sign that the legal community was ready for meaningful change. "Today," she began, her voice carrying the same measured confidence that had commanded attention in Courtroom 302, We're not just discussing legal principles. We're exploring how to create an environment where every voice in our courtrooms is heard and respected. In the front row, Judge Harrison sat with a notebook open, his pen poised to take notes. The past month had transformed him from a skeptic into one of the program's most passionate advocates. His own journey of self-reflection had become a powerful testimony to the possibility of change. Last week, he shared during the discussion period, "I caught myself making assumptions about a young attorney in my courtroom. But this time, I paused. I listened, and I discovered she had insights that completely changed my perspective on the case." His candor earned appreciative nods from his colleagues. The workshop broke into smaller groups, each tackling different scenarios drawn from real courtroom experiences. Michelle moved between the groups, observing as judges and legal professionals engaged in honest discussions about their own biases and assumptions. Sarah, now promoted to program coordinator, managed the logistics with her usual efficiency. She had set up recording equipment to capture key sessions for future training purposes. The state Supreme Court called. She whispered to Michelle during a break. They want to implement this program statewide. During the afternoon session, a panel of attorneys shared their experiences. Among them was Maria Rodriguez, a brilliant young lawyer who had faced similar challenges in her career. Seeing Justice Robinson handle that situation with such grace, she commented, showed me that maintaining professionalism isn't just about following rules. It's about setting an example for future generations. The workshop's success sparked interest from bar associations across the country. Michelle's inbox filled with requests for guidance on implementing similar programs. What had begun as a response to a single incident was evolving into a national movement for professional development. Judge Harrison's transformation proved particularly inspiring. He had volunteered to lead a session on recognizing and addressing unconscious bias in the courtroom. "It's not enough to acknowledge our mistakes," he explained to his colleagues. "We must actively work to create an environment where every legal professional can excel." As the day drew to a close, Michelle reviewed the feedback forms with satisfaction. Participants consistently praised the program's practical approach and emphasis on concrete solutions. One comment particularly stood out. "For the first time, I feel like we're not just talking about change. We're actually making it happen." The event concluded with an informal networking session where judges and attorneys mingled freely, sharing experiences and building connections. The artificial barriers of rank and status had given way to genuine professional respect. Looking out over the crowd, Michelle saw the future of the legal profession taking shape, one where excellence would be recognized regardless of appearance or background, where every courtroom would be a place of equal opportunity and respect. The incident in Courtroom 302 had been just the beginning of a much larger story. 6 months after the pivotal morning in Courtroom 302, the United States Supreme Court buzzed with anticipation. It was Justice Michelle Robinson's first major opinion day, and the press room was packed with reporters eager to witness history in the making. The magnificent building, with its marble columns and promises of equal justice under law carved in stone, seemed to take on new meaning. In her chambers, Michelle adjusted her robe, thinking about how far the legal profession had come and how far it still had to go. "The first set of mentoring program statistics just came in," Sarah announced, entering with a fresh stack of papers. "Applications for next year's law school classes are up 40%, with the most diverse pool of candidates we've ever seen." Michelle smiled, remembering the young faces she'd encountered during her recent visit to Capitol Law School. Professor Chen had invited her to speak to her constitutional law class, where students now studied not only legal precedents, but also the importance of professional dignity and resilience. The morning's significance wasn't lost on anyone present. As Michelle prepared to deliver her opinion, she noticed familiar faces in the courtroom. Judge Harrison sat in the gallery, alongside several participants from the Professional Excellence Program. Their presence represented the bridges that had been built over the past months. "In the case before us," Michelle began, her clear voice filling the chamber, "we consider not just the letter of the law, but its spirit. its promise of equal justice and fair consideration for all who seek its protection. Her words carried the weight of personal experience and professional wisdom. In courtrooms across the country, the ripple effects of change continued to spread. The Professional Excellence Program had been adopted by judicial systems in 12 states, with more joining every month. Young attorneys reported feeling more confident, knowing they had support systems in place. Back in Franklin County Courthouse, Courtroom 302 had become something of a legend. Law students would often visit, hoping to sit in the same space where Justice Robinson had demonstrated such remarkable grace under pressure. The incident had become a teaching moment, studied in legal ethics classes nationwide. After delivering her opinion, Michelle hosted a small gathering in her chambers. Among the guests was Maria Rodriguez, now a successful partner at her firm and a mentor to young attorneys. "Your story changed how I saw my own role in the profession," Maria shared. "It's not just about winning cases, it's about lifting others as we climb." Judge Harrison, who had become an unexpected ally in promoting professional development, spoke about his own journey. "Sometimes our greatest lessons come from our most humbling moments," he reflected. "Justice Robinson showed me that true judicial wisdom includes the ability to learn and grow." As the day drew to a close, Michelle stood at the Supreme Court's west windows, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant hues. A group of law students toured the building below, their excited voices carrying up to her window. Their presence reminded her of why the morning in Courtroom 302 had mattered so much. It wasn't just about one moment or one person, but about ensuring that every voice in the legal profession could be heard and respected. Sarah appeared at her door with a reminder about tomorrow's schedule, which included mentoring sessions with first-year law students. "Full circle," Michelle remarked, thinking about her own journey and the countless others who would follow. The legacy of that morning in Courtroom 302 lived on, not in moments of confrontation, but in daily acts of professional courtesy, in mentoring relationships that crossed traditional boundaries, and in courtrooms where excellence was recognized regardless of its source. It was proof that sometimes the most powerful changes come not from grand gestures, but from handling life's challenges with dignity, grace, and an unwavering commitment to justice.